Good evening, everyone. Andrew Courtney here. Welcome to a Get Finance Fit series for the COVID-19. It is our first Get Finance Fit webinar here for the UQ Young Alumni community. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So attendees, please mute yourselves if you can, and currentently unable to share the videos. So if you have technical problems or wish to say hi to everyone, please use the chat icon to all panelists. And panelists are answering questions posted to us before the webinar. We've been sent a ton of questions, so unfortunately we may not have the time to actually answer any live questions, but if we do get some time, we'll make sure to answer them. So recordings will be available after the webinar, so yeah, enjoy. So the key to this thing is that all matters talked about today is general information only. Please do not take this as personal advice. This is the typical disclaimer for all personal finance webinars. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so. All right, so we've got three panelists, me being one of them. What we're trying to do now is get things going. Since it is our first time, we're trying to work out the technical issues, but what I will do is give you a quick introduction of myself before I introduce the second and third panelists, Effie and Sean. So a little bit about myself. So I studied a Bachelor of Biomedical Science and finished honours, and essentially started a PhD and decided against going ahead and finishing that PhD because I basically fell in love with finance and investing. My wife and I ended up acquiring multiple properties, and we renovated a few of them and actually got massive results. And I thought to myself, I'm onto something here. So I went on this journey of moving from science into finance, read a ton of books, studied a Master of Commerce majoring in applied finance here at University of Queensland, and never looked back, basically. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell. I am the founder or co-founder of Plenitude Wealth and Plenitude Land, financial planning and mortgage broking firm based in St. Lucia. So yeah, that's pretty much me in a nutshell. Happy to educate. What we're all about is to educate 1 million Australians before we reach 10 years in business. Hence why I'm very, very active in the UQ Young Alumni community, trying to give as much information out as possible, and very, very active as well in all social media platforms. So let me start off with a poll. Please answer this particular poll right now, if you can. Just trying to gauge who our audience is tonight so that we can make sure to answer the right questions that were sent to us prior to the event. Thank you very much. We're at 60%. Thank you. Look at us go. 80%. We're almost there. I'll leave it up for 10 more seconds. Excellent. So we've got a wide range of attendees tonight. It's great to see. Okay, share. Right, so what I might do now is thank the UQ Young Alumni Advisory Board for organising this. The UQ Young Alumni Advisory Board are a bunch of volunteers willing to lend a hand to increase the positive experience that all UQ alums go through, especially just out of graduating into their first roles or first jobs in their careers. So we thank them very much, and also for Izzyco for managing to bring all three of us panelists together, and hopefully you guys can get a ton of value from tonight. We're here to add as much information, or to provide you with as much valuable information as possible. And without further ado, I might introduce Effie, our second panelist. Effie, you there?
Hello. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to come back home, as I call it. Did you want me to give a little bit about myself, Andrew? Or are you
Please,
gonna...
please, that'd be great. Thank you, Effie.
So yes, I did study a Bachelor of Economics at UQ many, many, many years ago. Let's leave the date alone on that one. And I ventured actually into banking as a graduate trainee. Back then, you know, it's amazing. The banks would come to campus and pick out the students they wanted. So you didn't even have to look for a job back then. It was quite easy to get a job. So I worked for Westpac actually as a graduate trainee for several years from the ground up, and continued as a branch manager, product manager, and so on. And then I met Paul Clitheroe, really the godfather of financial advice and financial communication. And I remember going for a job interview with him, and he gave me a tip, and he said, basically, it's not what you earn that counts, it's what you spend. And I was sold right there in the interview. And then he said, look, I'll give you a job, but at half the salary of what you got. Because remember, it's not what you earn that counts, it's what you spend. So look, I fell into media that way, and I edited Money magazine with the founder as well, Power Walkley, back in 1999. And I was the editor of Money magazine for over, almost 20 years on a finance magazine. I have since moved on to Canstar as their editor at large. I also do the money spots on Today Show, and I've written a couple of books. One is a children's financial book. I was hoping my kids will leave home early. They haven't. And the other one is a book really targeted to women, but the strategies still apply, from Converse to Louboutins, A Real Girl's Guide to Money. And I sit on the board of Extra as well, a not-for-profit organisation to help with financial capability.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Effie. And let's bring in our third panelist, Sean Bond from UQ Business School. Sean, you there?
Yes. Hello, everybody. Well, Effie's a really hard act to follow. I'm not sure how I'm going to tip what she provided you with there. I'm the boring professor on the panel. So, I'm fortunate. I recently joined the University of Queensland back in August last year. I spent 24 years overseas. So I had 12 years in the US, most recently in the business school at the University of Cincinnati. And before that, I was at the University of Cambridge in the UK, both where I completed my graduate degrees in economics, and then I was fortunate to stay on to teach there. But I'm excited to be back at UQ. I'm a UQ grad as well, so probably like Effie, maybe even older than Effie, I think. I graduated with
yes.
Undergraduate degree in economics as well. So I know what it's like to be sitting there, and it's really such a privilege to be teaching back at the UQ Business School now. So exciting times, and excited to share the platform with these two great panelists.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Sean. Before we get started with our first question of the night, we'll kick off with another poll. And let me quickly launch this one off. Please answer this, and then we get started with the first question. Now, first question is this, right? Keen to reduce credit card debt in case my salary is reduced. What are your top tips? So what we might do is wait another 15 seconds before the poll finishes, and then maybe Effie, you can take it away with an answer on that one.
Sure, Andrew. I'm keen to see what the financial literacy is there with that. I don't know if a lot of people realise that there was a survey that the Hilda survey did, 5 questions, which I thought were fairly simple, but we just failed as a country in answering those questions. Okay, here it is. I'm okay, I'm comfortable with the basics. 53%. Interesting. Okay, that's good. Good to know. I know you've got a financial advisor there, a couple of professionals too. So look, Andrew, with regards to credit card debt, I'm not a fan of credit card debt at all. It's that monkey on your back that once you have is so hard to get rid of. And it's interesting, I have a 19-year-old that doesn't even really understand credit cards, and that's great. But in my era, credit cards were like your rite of passage. You're 18, you get a credit card, and then off you go. What we're seeing right now with this pandemic is people that have a huge amount of credit card debt. Obviously, it is harder and struggling a little bit more than others. Nobody wants to get into a credit card cycle, but once you are in there, it is quite hard to get out of it. So if you're looking for not impossible though, I don't want to be like there's no hope, of course there is. A case with credit card debts, my first thing was what I say to people is, forget the numbers, have a really good look at yourself and just go, why is it? Why do I do what I do with my money? I've seen people earn $200,000, $300,000, and I've seen people earn $60,000, and the people that are on $200,000 are more in the mess than those on $60,000. So that tip I gave right at the beginning, it's not what you earn that counts, as what you spend. It is dead on. It's exactly what we should be thinking and doing with ourselves. Some solutions if you are in some credit card debt is simple as get a piece of paper, write down your debts, put them in order of biggest to smallest, and put the interest rate next to it. There are a couple of methods out there you've probably heard, like a debt snowball or a debt avalanche. A snowball basically crushes the smallest debt first. I like that because I'm more of a behavioral type of person. I want to know that I can pay my $2,000 debt off. I've done it, tick, I've crossed it, I then move on to the other one. If you start with a big one, it can really knock you down emotionally because it takes a while to do. Other people like the Avalanche Method, and that is you hit the most expensive. For these strategies to work, you've got to put your repayments down to your minimum, so at least you're not getting a bad credit score history. Get it down to the minimum and then focus all your cash flow on knocking that other debt down. You probably heard of zero balance transfer cards. They sound amazing, don't they? 0%. There's nothing free as far as I'm concerned. Check the fees on that. It might have a 0% interest, but the balance transfer could be as high as 2 to 3%. On a $10,000 debt, the effective rate is anything but 0%. Watch out for that. That's the biggest trap with balance transfer cards. The other thing is you've got a balance transfer fee, maybe an annual fee, and I'll just quickly state the other ones. You may not get your full amount. You could end up with 2 credit cards. You have to be a new customer. Sometimes you don't even know if you are an existing customer with a person that underwrites other cards as well. So do take care with balance transfer cards. Some of them are, 0% for 24 months. I've seen some ridiculous periods. Work out, can I pay it during that period? And whatever you do, don't use that card during that interest-free period. That's a pretty quick snapshot, Andrew. Was that okay?
It sounds pretty good, Effie.
Okay.
Add, Sean?
Effie gave a great explanation. They're the key sort of approaches a lot of people use. I am terribly sorry and aware that a lot of people are suffering. A lot of people have lost their jobs at the moment. So, I just want to recognize that it's a tough time for a lot of people as well. And these are really challenging practical issues. So, I think personally something I've found is always, I try to keep track of my spending fairly closely as well. And I think by following Effie's general advice of, being aware of what you spend, that's for me one of the key things that's been beneficial just at a personal finance level. But I know it's a tough time for a lot of people, and I'm sorry that people are in that situation.
And if I can just add, if you are in financial hardship right now, since we are doing a COVID-19 finance webinar, there is financial relief in the sense of putting repayments on hold for a while with credit cards, just like you've probably heard with home loans and personal loans. Like I said, nothing is for free. If it is on hold, chances are the interest is accruing and it's adding up. So do speak to your lender as to what are your options and what are the implications of the options that you choose.
Excellent. Thank you very much. One thing to add there is, look, in desperate times call for desperate measures as well, right? So if you're running out of cash, if you're all out of cash, if you've only got a credit card to kind of utilize, I think you're sort of forced to play that hand. But the key is to not fall into the trap of getting down that debt spiral, because you could be stuck in there for 20 years, right? That's the challenge. So you really need to make sure you reduce as fast as possible, right? So I'm totally with you there. Brilliant. Second question. I think this one's for you, Sean. Should I sell a rental property even at a lower value than pre-COVID-19 in order to be debt-free next year after I retire? This is
great question. And I must admit I don't have a crystal ball, and as Andrew acknowledged earlier, we can only give very general advice here. So anyone listening to us needs to consider their own situation in particular. But when I think about rental properties, I think the key thing, if you're thinking of selling, what's the return been for you? So write down and track carefully, how has this investment performed? So you have to know, what is it returning? How good an investment has it been for you? And then obviously, try to get a sense of what it's worth in the current market. Speak to a broker or whatever. And I also like to ask the question, if I was in the market today, would I buy that? Or in the current situation you're in, would I buy that property knowing what I do today? And sometimes as you work through those issues, how has it been performing? Has it been a good investment for you? Do you expect it to continue to be a good investment? And is it the type of thing that you would buy again today? You've probably seen some of the commentary I've given in the media about house prices. I think undoubtedly we're looking at a more challenging time with regard to the housing market. Some of the headline figures you hear, that's going to lag what's actually taking place in the market today. So it's going to be a couple of months before the main indices that you hear starts showing a potential fall. But most of the commentary that you've seen out there indicates that housing's not going to escape this downturn. A lot depends on how long this crisis goes on for. That's something we don't know. Are we looking at something that will pass by fairly quickly, or are we stuck in this sort of like lockdown world on and off with some freeing of the economy for a while, but then having to lock down? If that goes on for longer, I think housing is going to be more heavily impacted.
Anything to add, Effie? Thank you, Sean.
Look, we actually did a live auction. My partner was looking at selling a property. So I've been through a live auction myself at the moment now, an online live auction. Look, if I can just share with you, definitely support what Sean was saying with regards to if you're selling right now, buyers do know that there may be a reason why you're selling. And there's not a lot of stock on there as well. So it's probably more buyers are in control at the moment than the sellers. Looking at the auction rates, the latest ones I could get, obviously last weekend was Anzac weekend. So these auction clearance rates are from the week prior to that and from Domain. Brisbane auction clearance rates were 25%. That's really, really low. And obviously the reason being is because since we've been in lockdown, well, we can't do live auctions, we can't do open inspections. So that's to be expected. As Sean was saying, the actual numbers out there and the statistics and what they're showing, Commonwealth Bank, I think, revised its prediction 10% at least with property prices expected to fall. There is no doubt about that prices will move. If you are fortunate enough, this is a good opportunity. It is always the case that if you buy well, whatever the case may be, whether it's property, whether it's shares, if you do buy well and hold it for a long time, then you will hopefully do well. It's unfortunate if we have to sell at down times, then we are realizing those losses. And unfortunately, this is a time where some of us are going to see this as a great opportunity, and others are unfortunately going to remember this as a period where they had to realize losses.
Yeah, so just to add on to that, what you really need to consider is it worthwhile taking a loss right at this particular stage in time now? Can you hold on to it? Is it positively geared? Is it negatively geared? What kind of debt level do you currently have, and how does that make you feel? Are you comfortable with that? If you want to be debt-free and you're hell-bent on being debt-free, maybe it is the way to go. But you really need to kind of consider a few things. Whether it's positively geared, negatively geared. Because if it's positively geared, maybe you can hold on to it for a few more years, potentially. Like you got to, just like what Sean mentioned, look at what the return on investment is. If there's scope for increasing, for growth over the next few years, you may be able to get out of it without a loss, right? So these are the things that you need to consider. Obviously a time frame as well, right? If it's not really that big of a hit in your hip pocket, maybe you can hold on to it. And it's okay to be in debt when you're retired, because if it's not that big of a hit in your hip pocket, it's all good, right? The key is to understand that you've got an income in retirement, and if you've got that income, if you're comfortable with that, you can make some moves, not forced to make moves. Yeah. Okay, next question.
Sorry, can I just jump in? Sorry,
yes.
I just want to, Troy, I noticed you put in there 10%, thanks, what amount will prices fall? There's no hard and fast rule, so I don't want people with the understanding that I've just said property prices, definitely 10%. They could fall even more. Like every other asset class out there, some could fall more, some could fall less. And as Sean was saying, depends on how long this health crisis happens. The longer it happens, the worse the situation can be. But yeah, that was just one figure that came out from the Commonwealth Bank, and they could be revising it as we speak right now.
Absolutely. I've got a question here from, let's have a look, Rachel. I'm grateful for the position that I'm in, but I've worked hard to get here. She's paid out her mortgage, car loan, no credit card debt. I have some shares, good super and managed funds and property. So what should I do to invest for retirement? Approximately 15 years away, and how aggressive should I be with the share market? Or maybe this is a question for me. Let me share some thoughts. What you need to do as an investor each and every time, like every time you invest, every time you make a financial decision, is understand that there are three key variables that you need to consider. There's the return on investment, right? There's the risk-free return that you can fetch yourself in the marketplace, and there's a cost of capital. So for you, Rachel, you've got zero cost of capital because you've got no debt. So the question that I have for you is, what is your risk-free return? Is it a term deposit in ANZ or CBA or one of the big fours? Or is it an access account at 0.01%? Or is it another thing? Right? So you've got to ask yourself, can you park your extra money into an asset that is producing a very, very low return, but very, very low risk as well? And then ask yourself, what kind of risk are you willing to take in the short, medium, and long term, right? If your retirement age is 15 years away, you're going to ask yourself, what is your net asset position at this particular stage in time? And how much income do you think that net asset position can produce for you? And is that anywhere near close to what you're trying to achieve in retirement, right? Point A and point B. So you need to understand, you got to set some income goals and some capital goals, right? So what is your income goal in retirement? Every single person is different, right? So you got to set that goal and then work out what kind of capital you need, and that'll determine what kind of actions you need to take, whether it be saving aggressively over the next 15 years or investing a little bit more aggressively, right? So that'll determine what kind of moves you can make as an investor. Anything to add there, Effie or Sean?
It sounds like a first world problem, which is great to be in. So first of all, congratulations on being in that situation. Yeah, look, I would have to agree, Andrew, you are the financial advisor here, so I better not step into the realm of giving financial advice. Yeah.
And if I would just add to that, once again, congratulations to Rachel for being in a good position. I really liked Andrew's approach that, particularly with regard to retirement savings, the goal really is to try to provide a stable income for yourself that's relatively safe in retirement and something that you're not going to outlive. And so the question is, standing here today, how do you reach that point? As Andrew mentioned, I think too often our focus is often on short-term performance, but ultimately, particularly with regard to retirement savings, it's about how to generate that income we need in retirement and how to do that, hopefully in the safest possible way, while also managing longevity risk.
Yeah.
Okay, so now the question is then, how do you get to that point from here? It sounds like you already have some shares, you've got some superannuation. So once again, I would say, look closely, well, how is that invested exactly? So what kind of funds is your super currently in? Are you comfortable with that risk? What I think is important, and I think what the crash of the Corona crash has taught us is how comfortable are you with stock market risk? Because what I worry about with a lot of people is I saw a lot of evidence of panic selling. So people were freaked out by the market crash and they sold, and they've subsequently missed out on some of the recovery in the market. So I think thinking about what risk profile you're comfortable with now and putting in place a good long-term savings strategy with that money invested in a way that you feel comfortable with the risk. Because I think what you also want to avoid is these panic, chasing the latest fad in the market. Think about when we had the tech boom and the sort of like the biotech boom and the Tesla boom. Suddenly, we hear about these booming investments and everyone chases the latest and greatest. I think, thinking carefully now about what broad risk profile that you're comfortable with and putting that in place, being consistent with your savings goal is very important.
And Sean, I also liked how you were saying looking at what you want in retirement. I always like to work backwards with myself. What is it? How much do I want to live on when I retire? I always have this saying that my greatest fear is wearing polyester and drinking cask wine when I'm in retirement. That's my little motto that I have for myself. So what is it that I need to live on? And then there are so many great calculators online too. As for the Super Guru, some great tables with, how much super, what will that get me, what my other investments will get me. And then I kind of do a budget, a forward thinking budget that this will get me this much. Is that enough for me in retirement? So yeah, I do like the idea of forward planning.
Excellent. Good stuff. All right. Next question. What are your thoughts on buying property versus renting in this time of COVID-19? Sean, I think this one's a good one for you.
We've spoken a little bit about sort of like the real estate market and what potentially could happen. And once again, I want to reiterate, I don't have a crystal ball with regard to what could happen, but I think that decision, a lot of that comes back to what your own personal situation is like. If you were at a stage where you were ready to buy or thinking about buying anyway, then it's certainly something, as long as you feel like you have a stable job, and once again, we're seeing a lot of people having their hours reduced. So for some people, even if they wanted to buy, we know that's a challenging time at the moment. A lot of people wouldn't feel comfortable with that type of commitment. And buying real estate is really expensive. Once you own a house, you also have to think about the maintenance costs, the rates, the insurance. So I think sometimes, once again, with housing, it's easy to be caught up in how well it's performed, and certainly it's performed well. But what you don't hear about is all the money people spend on maintenance, renovation, rates. So, I'm actually, even though I spend a lot of time researching real estate markets, and I think in the right situation, owning a house can make a lot of sense. I also think there's nothing wrong with renting, particularly if you're early in your career. I think for any young person, sort of like focusing on developing your human capital, pursuing your career opportunities, pursuing higher education that helps set you up for the job that you need. So for some people, renting is definitely the right option. So you really have to think about those other aspects in your life in terms of, are you ready to buy? Do you have the income to support both the mortgage as well as the maintenance that comes with buying a house? And then also, because it's so expensive to trade a property, you lose so much commission if you have to sell. Are you going to be able to keep that property for a long period of time, or are you anticipating keeping that property for a reasonable long period of time as well?
Anything to add, Effie?
Yeah, if I was looking at it right now, what we're seeing on the rental side is I'd be very nervous buying investment property right now because of the yields that you possibly may get. But if you are renting, I suppose a good side to this is that we're seeing more Airbnb properties hit the market because there is no kind of short-term demand for Airbnbs now. People obviously aren't going away on holidays or weekends and so on. They're flooding the market. They're putting yields down. You could possibly go out and find yourself a pretty great place, and rent would be pretty cheap. So you could lock yourself in for a nice place and fairly cheap rent, given there's so much supply of property on the market. And then sit back, and then, as Sean was saying, take that advice as to looking for your next big buy. That's my only kind of add in right now, looking at it right now.
Yeah, just to share my 2 cents on this, like when you're renting versus owning, look, it's neither here nor there. It's just, it depends. There's no real hard and fast rule. It really depends on every single situation, every scenario. Because the issue that you have when acquiring a property, as Sean mentioned before, is that you're going to need to hold on to it for quite some time. So if you are looking to acquire something, make sure you've got certainty in your job and in your income earning capacity, at least for the next 3 to 5 years. 5 years is the more prudent way of going about it, because as Sean mentioned, it is very expensive to get in and very expensive to get out. So ideally, you want to do your research, you want to do some solid due diligence, and you don't want to be buying a lemon for your first property, right? So that's the worst thing you can do, because it can literally slow down your investment journey for 7 to 10 years if you get it wrong, right? So one of the key things that I always tell people is, well, how much rent are you currently paying, right? And if you compare that to what the outgoings are for holding onto a property, what's the current market interest rate, you'll be surprised how much the comparable is. So let's say $500 worth of rent, it gets you $25,000 worth of P&I repayments, right? So if I just do a quick calculation on, let's say 5%, so $25,000 divided by 5%, that's P&I, let's say, you can get a loan of $500,000. So the question is, are you willing to go ahead and take that, spending 5% here, $500 per week here renting versus $500 per week paying for that property? Now, the big risk is you're paying for the maintenance, the rates, and all the extra costs, right? So you've got to ask yourself, is it worth that while? Because if that property increases in value over time, and if you get the right one, obviously it does kind of creep up. And with the power of leverage as well, you get massive return on investment. So you've got to kind of weigh it up and make sure that you don't make a mistake, because if you do make a mistake at the front end, it'll slow you down dramatically. Okay, hopefully that's helped. Okay, moving on to the next one. Okay. Can I do anything to protect my super? Oh, actually, let me skip that one. Let's move on to the next. Is accessing my super early a good idea? This one's for you, Effie, I think. I think you've got some interesting points for this one.
Mm-hmm.
And what are the potential implications or consequences if I do access my super early?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of super. But first of all, Troy, I do want to say, yes, there are some good cask swine out there. I definitely agree. I think things have improved in that department. So maybe I will be okay in retirement. Look, this is really interesting. This has been a hot topic. All about accessing your super. Should you access your super? Can you access your super to actually pay back debt, or use it to buy a property maybe? It was something I asked the ATO directly on this, because I was a little bit confused about, would you take your money out of super? Can you take your money out of super and pay your credit card? The short answer to this was, surprisingly, yes. If you qualify for the early release of super, if you qualify for it, then there are no rules around what you actually have to use the money for. So there's no rules on what you have to or what you can't use the money for. So let me just be clear here. You must be able to qualify for it. So the eligibility criteria to access super under COVID-19 now is you must be unemployed, be redundant, be getting a job seeker payment, or you must have had your hours reduced by 20%, or if you're a sole trader, you must have your income fall by 20%. So go onto the ATO's website for the complete breakdown there. So technically, you could be on $200,000, lucky you. Your income has reduced, your hours, reduced by 20%. Technically, you can use that super money to pay off your credit card if that's your financial woe. Now, take it back a step. The rules are you can take out $10,000 this financial year and then $10,000 again next financial year. So I believe at last numbers were about 500,000 Aussies have been granted approval, and the average withdrawal amount is $8,000. So now that we've established you can take it out to pay your credit card debt, would you? Should you? So this is where you do probably need to get some good independent advice, or even call the debt helpline and speak to a financial counsellor. This is something, it's funny, I spoke about this today on a live webinar for CanStar as well. It seems to be a really hot topic. So if I had $20,000 debt on a credit card and it was charging 17%, and I paid only minimum monthly repayments, it will take you most of your life to pay off, but it will cost about $44,000 in interest. That's assuming you only make minimum repayments. So we've worked out what the debt costs you. What is the cost of accessing your super early? You've got to find that out as well. So the Industry Super Australia ran some numbers. And it basically said, if you're say 25 and you take the 20,000 out and you do no catch-up you do nothing to catch up with that money, you could find yourself a shortfall of about $120,000 when you retire. So here we go. These are all just numbers and scenarios, and you can cut and slice the numbers any which way you want. So I've got 120,000 potentially lost by not putting, by taking it out of my super versus 44,000 on my credit card. It seems like a no-brainer, doesn't it? I'll pay off my credit card. But you can do this. You can take the 20,000, pay off your credit card, don't play catch up on your super, and then rack up another $20,000 on your credit card afterwards. That's a financial mess. So you've really got to be honest with yourself and ask these questions. Why am I taking my money out of my super? Where is it going? Have I done my sums? And have I got expert advice to work this out? On the property side, I'll just be quick there. If you are eligible to get this money, that means your income has dropped. A lender right now will probably not give you a home loan if your income has dropped. So you might need to sit tight. Although I did get a question, someone said, can't I take it out and just put it in an online saver and wait till I get my job back up again? I'll leave you to play with the numbers, but I don't think it's what the spirit of this relief was intended for, but people are asking it and people are doing it.
Excellent. Anything to add, Sean, at all?
Effie gave a great response. She's obviously much more aware about the rules around this. The only thing I would mention is, obviously, if you're in a real dire situation at the moment, you've got to do what you have to do to get through. I understand that some people are struggling to put food on the table. So, if that's your situation, well, good luck to you, and you think carefully about what you're doing. The other thing, though, when you think about your retirement savings, really that's the money you're going to have available to you or need to have available to you when you're 75, when you're 85. So what would, I like to think about, what would the 75-year-old me say to me today if I was thinking about a choice like that? Because you're really taking money from your future self in order to deal with your situation now. Now, as I say, it's maybe a mental, a way to help rationalize that situation. But think about what the future you would say, because you may well need that money when you're 65 or when you're 75 or when you're 85. When you're 85, you just can't go out and get a job to top up your retirement savings. So think carefully before making a choice like that.
Yeah, that's for sure. Question for you, Sean. Do you see similarities in how the market is responding to the pandemic compared to the GFC, and what are the differences?
Yeah, great question. It was interesting. To some extent, you should listen to what I say and do the opposite, because in terms of the history of my career moves, I moved to the UK sort of like in the mid-90s recession, and so I had terrible timing there. Then I moved to the US at the start of the financial crisis, so I had terrible timing there. And then just as I moved back to Australia, I came here, bought a house, settled into my new job, and then we went through the bushfires and then the corona crisis. So, every time I do a job move, it's a terrible time for the world economy. So, as I said, that's a challenge. But, I saw firsthand what happened in the US. Thinking about it in simple terms, I think the global financial crisis was like someone having a heart attack. Okay, because the global economy overdosed on sort of like low credit quality subprime housing loans, and that clogged up the financial system. And this continued for a couple of years, and then suddenly, sort of like the economy had a heart attack because the financial system got choked with this bad debt. So it was a very long recovery. I mean, we refer to it as the jobless recovery for a long time because it took 5 or 6 years, certainly in the US. I mean, Australia was a little less impacted by the global financial crisis than many other countries were. But in the US, it was 5 or 6 years before we saw any job growth. That's because the nature of financial crisis, it's such a deep shock to the financial system. It takes a long time to deal and unwind all of those decisions that were made and deal with that debt. But I think the current crisis, I mean, what's so shocking about this, it's almost like a car accident, or a natural disaster. If the global financial crisis was a heart attack where the financial system seized up, this has been a bit like a natural disaster or a car crash. Because, overall, while there was some signs the economy was starting to ease off a little, and even in Australia there was talk of are we heading into a recession, suddenly we went from Well, in fact, the stock market reached its highest level in Australia on the 20th of February. So, even through till February, the outlook, while we're aware of the looming crisis, we went from that point to suddenly, just stopping dead almost. The global economy got locked down. So that's a very different type of crisis. As I say, I think of it almost like a natural disaster in the impact that it's had. And I think this is why some of the policy responses from the governments around the world, it's really about trying to get through this time of, get through the time of lockdown and then keep businesses alive, keep households in a reasonable form, that when we get through this crisis, the economy can pick back up again.
Yes, very interesting. Effie, anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on, Sean, that was a good point where you were saying with regards to the market being at its high in February. I actually looked at these figures today. So the S&P ASX 200 hit a high on February 21 of 7,139. It then dropped down on the 23rd of March, right down to 4,544. That's huge. And I know we don't have much to compare this, and you would know this better than me, Sean. The GFC, I would imagine, is completely different to this crisis. But when it comes to super, since we were talking about this, the thing that I do like about super, it's for saving. It is our money. It does give us that retirement income, but it also is diversified. So when you look at the GFC, which hit 2007, 2009, the share market dropped 50%. But it was interesting when you look at some figures that Industry Super Australia brought out to show, well, what happened with a balance fund. Well, did a balance fund fall 50% during that period? No, it didn't, because when you invest in super, normally it is diversified across different asset classes. And if you're in a balanced one, it's probably 50% growth shares and 50% not. So they showed an example of someone who had 100,000 in their super fund just before the GFC hit. And then what happened over that period, 2007, 2009, it actually fell just over 20%. So the balance fell down to $78,000. It took about 3 years for it to recover, so 2012. If that gives you any comfort, things did move up, and that was the time frame it took. Again, who knows what this situation and how long will it be, but that was the case with the GFC. And the reason I like giving that example is it does give some people some understanding that just because you see on the news the share market's fallen that ridiculous amount, your super balance hasn't, because it is diversified.
Yes, diversification is key. I mean, I think far too many novice investors tend to just go black and white, shares or property, one or the other, and they don't really realize that there are a plethora of other underlying assets that you can invest in as an investor, right? So it's very, very important to sort of read up on it a little bit more. There's a ton of information out there online to really get a good grasp of what's available. I noticed there's a few questions about ETFs. Look into it, see what's available, see if you can track the market, see if you can track the ASX 200. There's a few ETFs available that are nice and cheap. You can just ride the market. And so long as you've got a long-term investment horizon, it's very, very hard to go wrong, because you're essentially betting on the Australian economy. Right? Historically, we've done very, very well, similar to what's happened in America, right? So if you've got a long-term time horizon, it's great to get in, right? Because they've obviously taken a hit. So the big question is, what are you going to do with your funds at this particular stage in time? Unfortunately, if you're not aware, if you're not privy to what kind of things to look out for, it's very, very difficult. And you may need to take a kind of a step back and just kind of watch this thing unfold. Right. So if you are interested in learning a little bit more and you need to take that stance, the question is, well, do you think the market's going to go sideways, going to go up, or going to go down? Right? What's going to happen? How long will this COVID-19 pandemic last for? And what's the effect of quarantine? Right? Recent numbers just came out where the GDP of America, of the US, actually dropped by 4%. So that's in the first quarter. What happens in the next quarter? And how will the market actually react to that? So the American market is actually quite buoyant post the post the little dip that post the crash that they had there. So it's interesting to see how that's going to happen. Personally, for me, I've got a bit of money in cash, and it's been sitting there for quite some time because I wasn't quite sure whether or not to invest, because it was kind of getting overvalued. A bunch of assets were just ridiculously overpriced. But unfortunately, not everyone can keep an eye on the market. So what you need to do is diversify accordingly and make sure you don't try and pick the winners or the short term, right? Now, if you're really interested in kind of getting into it, you may need to get your fingers burnt a little bit to get more experience. You read a ton of books and make sure you kind of don't throw yourself into it too deeply, right? Because you could lose a ton of cash. So invest for the long term, right? And dollar cost average if you can, and just protect yourself out there. Yeah, very, very important. Cool. All right, next question. If we are unemployed now as a result of COVID-19 situation, what is the best way for us to invest or manage our finances? So this is a three-part question, actually. As young working graduates, how can we position ourselves financially to take advantage of the current conditions? And should I consider investing in the stock market as prices are low at the moment, and there's signs I should look out for, right? So let me just quickly answer. I mean, if you're unemployed, the first thing that you need to do is protect your buffer. First and foremost, I wouldn't be looking to invest. I'd be looking at lowering my cost as much as possible. I call it the minimum viable lifestyle, right? Lowering that as best as you can so that you know you've got a runway for the buffer that you currently have. And then the next course of action is to find that job. If you can't find that next job, guess what? You may need to look at Fiverr, Airtasker, whatever it may be to top up that buffer, because if you start to eat into your buffer, what's going to happen is over time, you're going to have less and less options for yourself, and desperation starts to kick in. And that's when, things can get really chaotic in life. So you need to protect that buffer. So if you have that buffer in place, and it's a sizable one at that, i.e. 6 months, maybe potentially 1 year's worth of expenses, then you could potentially look at investing. And yes, the market has crashed. We're currently running a project at the moment where we're filtering through all of the shares in the ASX 200 to see which ones have crashed more than 50%, more than 60, more than 70. Maybe you could look at their balance sheets if you're au fait with these things and see which ones cashed up, because a lot of businesses are actually really, really solid businesses. It's just the market sentiment that's actually pushed them down, right? So those are the key things that you need to consider. As working graduates, how can we position ourselves? Look, you need to, just like what Sean mentioned, you need to work on your careers. You need to be highly skilled. You need to be valuable in the marketplace so that you're constantly employed, right? Because that's the number one asset that we all have, right? Your ability to earn an income is huge. You need to protect that thing, right? You need to build your skills up. Anything to add, Effie or Sean?
If you're in that situation now, or all of us, I mean, stripped to a crisis budget, I throw all money logic out the window if I'm in that situation and put in what's called a crisis budget. So sometimes normal money rules don't apply when you've got a crisis budget. First step is exactly what you said, Andrew. You got to, what income have you got in? So count all your beans. And by that, I mean, can you get JobKeeper, job seeker? Have you got the Airtasker, as Andrew was talking about? What's your money coming in? Then if you've got any assistance or relief or help, put that in, implement that in. And then normally when we talk budgets, we talk saving buckets. Forget that. You want to get now to expense buckets. Set up 3 expense buckets. I like to have a must have, a need to have, and a love to have. And you know what I'm going to say there? Get rid of the love to have. There's no room now for shoes or cushions, which are my 2 biggest vices. And get rid of that bucket completely and focus on your must and need. And they'll be different to different people. Obviously, your must is shelter, food, utilities, that kind of stuff. Need can be very different in this time. It's a crisis. For example, right now, I need Netflix and Stan. There's no way I'm going to have 2 kids in the house without something to entertain them while I work. So that's what I mean by need. And the other one, get rid of. Preserve your cash flow. As Andrew was saying, you really got to preserve that and look for different ways to preserve that. For example, of all times, my vacuum cleaner went on the blink. So how did I buy one? I'm not using cash. I used all my points. Was it the best way to use my points? Absolutely not. But I'm not going to be flying anywhere soon. So right now that preserved my cash flow. So that gives you a bit of an example what I mean by that. So yeah, that would be my tip right now, is to put in a crisis budget. Best way to spend this weekend.
Anything to add before we move?
Great suggestions. And, just in terms of thinking about investing in the stock market, I know Andrew mentioned about analysing individual shares. I would say for a lot of people, thinking about a broad-based index tracking fund to get your exposure to the market is definitely worthwhile thinking about. Obviously, if you're more familiar with investing, then you may have a different strategy you want to follow. Generally speaking, we know from experience, most people can't outperform the market. So for most of us, having a low-cost index tracking fund as a way to get your stock market exposure, rather than trying to pick winners, is sort of like what I would recommend to most people in that situation. And then, as you've also heard, sometimes, particularly for our superannuation money, often we're investing through our portfolio of assets. So could be a balanced fund like Effie mentioned. So that's going to include a little bit of the stock market, a little bit of the bond market, maybe some commercial real estate as well, or something like that. So once again, for a lot of us, for our long-term savings, where we're putting that money aside regularly, that's a great way to do it without getting caught up in a lot of the other analysis that could be done.
Excellent, good stuff. Okay, so before we wrap up, there is this question that stood out to all of us, and we'll finish up with this last question. And this question is, what is one smart money move you should have made but did not when you just graduated from university? Who wants to tackle this one first?
Sean, go. I don't even know the answers to these ones.
It's interesting. Great question, and kudos to the person who asked that, because I think that's very insightful. I often say to the students in my class, look, as a young person just graduating from UQ, of course, that you're already a multi-millionaire. It doesn't seem like it, and you don't have millions of dollars in the bank, but what you have is your human capital. Okay, you're going to have the next 40 or 45 years of working. So to some extent, what you should be thinking about is, how can I do as much as I can to increase the value of my human capital? And then you have to really nurture that carefully, because that's a huge asset. As I said, it's a multi-million-dollar asset for a young person graduating today. So that's very important to be thinking about, and let that dominate your thought. And then if you're sure about the direction, if you're comfortable with the direction you're going with your career and how you're going to start your working life or head into your working life, then that's when I think it's also good to be thinking about a long-term strategy. So your question was, what do I wish I would have done differently? To some extent, I've been fairly fortunate because I took a few risky decisions and that paid off. And one of them was after I graduated and I had a great position in Brisbane. I was well regarded. I actually took a risk and decided to go back and give up my income to go back and do graduate studies. So for me, that turned out to be completely transformative as well, and really changed the direction of my life, and has given me a great academic career to pursue. So to me, that was the big risk I took, was giving up what seemed like a good career, and I'm sure what would have been great, to go and pursue my dream to be an academic. So that's certainly something that, as I said, for me, that was a great thing to do. But for any young person, think a lot about how you want to develop yourself and the steps you want to take in your career.
Shall I? Maybe I should answer next. Look, the biggest mistake, or something that I did not do, was research. So I came out, started to work, and my lovely wife, girlfriend at the time, was hell-bent on getting me out of my parents' home. Started to work, earned my first paycheck, and essentially I had enough of a savings. At the time, the banks were lending like 98%, right? So I ended up borrowing 98% and buying this one-bedroom apartment in Budds Beach Surfers Paradise, right? It was good at the time, don't get me wrong, but the problem was, if I bought well, if I did research, if I knew what I was doing at the time, if I just took 3 to 6 months more to learn a little bit more before getting in there, right? If I didn't succumb to the pressure of my lovely wife, who I love very, very dearly, she'll probably see this video later, so I gotta get some brownie points in there. I would have made probably $100,000, maybe $200,000 or $300,000 more because I kept that thing for 10 years. Now, it didn't increase in value. That is the biggest mistake, financial mistake that I made. But in saying that, you do learn from your mistakes also, right? Do not let your mistakes or failures cripple you, because it makes you stronger. It makes you better as an investor and as a person in general, right? So really, I mean, it's an interesting question. Do I see it as a negative in my life? Look, I see it as a catalyst for massive personal growth and personal development as an investor and as a human being for me. So I don't really see it as a mistake. I always try and see the silver lining, but I certainly would be in a much stronger financial position today if I took away 3 to 6 months and did a little bit more homework before acquiring that first property. Do not buy new. Whatever you do, the numbers got to stack up tremendously, because the builder, the developer, the marketer, the agent's got to make their cut, right? So there's a lot of carrots being dangled in front of us, and just make sure you do your homework if you're buying new. On to you, Effie.
Well, I must say Budds Beach is a very nice place at the Gold Coast. I have been there a few times, being a Gold Coast girl. So yeah, I wouldn't call Budds Beach a bad investment. Mine would definitely be, and I can see this day crystal clear, when I graduated, got my first job and the first paycheck was coming. They brought around a financial advisor, and he was trying to get us to salary sacrifice. Now, what 20-year-old wants to salary sacrifice their first paycheck? Not me. I didn't want to do that. And that was my biggest regret. And I know a lot of people either love super or hate super, but my mate Darren did this. And I said, are you crazy? And it was only $50 each fortnight he was going to salary sacrifice. And I said, no way, no way. I really should have, because when you've come out of uni, you're poor as. So, you're not going to notice $50 missing from your pay. So whether you put it in super, I guess my tip here, it doesn't matter, it's irrelevant. The tip here is that small change goes a long way. If you look after the cents, the dollars will definitely follow. And believe me, time goes fast. Time moves fast. So if you can come out of uni, you're used to living poor and broke, you're used to it, and you get your first paycheck, put some away, pay yourself first. And in the ETFs that Sean and Andrew are talking about, or super, whatever your flavor is, go for it. And you will just thank me when you're my age and you look back and you go, yes.
Fantastic. So final poll before we wrap things up, ladies and gentlemen. Let me launch this thing. What is it that you'd like to hear more of for the next Get Finance Fit event? Feel free to answer this before we wrap things up. So I just want to thank both Effie and Sean for coming along and presenting and sharing your insights and thoughts. They're very, very valuable. Lots of experience behind your words and wisdom. It's brilliant to have you on board, and we look forward to working with you in the future. We also want to thank the UQ Young Alumni Advisory Board, and obviously Izzy Koa, the Young Alumni Engagement Officer, who managed to bring all of this together. And thank you, the UQ audience and the UQ community. We loved having you guys here, the young alumni and other alumni alike. It seems to me that we've got a solid range, a solid cross-section of UQ alums across the board here, so that's fantastic. Okay, we've got all the polls here. Excellent. Share results. Good stuff. So there will be a survey that will pop up after the webinar. So make sure you answer that survey so that you can help us improve for the future events that we'll be running. There will be a recording of this, and it'll be going up onto the internet, or potentially YouTube. UQ will get back to you on that one. But before we finish up, let me share my screen with you. I've got a few things to promote. Okay, here. So next event is the UQ Young Alumni Young Professional Series. It's all about employability, ensuring that you understand what moves you need to make as a young alumni to stay employable during changing and challenging and uncertain times. Thursday, 28th of May, 1 hour-long webinar. Hopefully we can see you there. Effie, a little bit about yourself and a call to action for you. If you want to follow Effie, take it away.
Yeah, just quickly, I do a free newsletter. It goes out every Monday. It's called Money Mondays with me. I have a bit of a rant. There are 4 stories from experts across Australia, usually property, investing, super, something like that. I'm also running a free 8-week money makeover. It's a little nudge. Each week there's a challenge. It's super, it's investing, it's budgeting. That closes tonight. So it's kind of like, I say, a Michelle Bridges style boot camp. But the good thing about mine is that you can eat carbs for the whole 8 weeks and drink and still come out looking really good. Yeah, they're my 2. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, moving on to me. So follow me on Instagram for daily finance tips at Andrew David Courtney. Report giveaway, look to your right here. So essentially, we've highlighted and mapped out the 5-year, 10-year, 15-year, and 20-year growth of all the suburbs, of all the houses in all the suburbs in the southeast Queensland corner. We've got 7 different councils. So if you're into property, if you've got property yourself and you're curious as to how your property has gone in the past and potentially looking to buy and you want to look at historical results, obviously what happened in the past is not necessarily going to happen in the future. This is a solid way to actually filter through to actually find out where are the hotspots, what's happened in the past, and potentially create a hypothesis for yourself and invest in a suburb with the right data in front of you. I always present, and every single time I present, I start to record. And I've got a few webinars and seminars up on YouTube now, so feel free to have a look at my YouTube account and my Instagram, or link up with me on LinkedIn. Sean.
Finally, I just want to mention, I know some people have mentioned about unemployment, but the UQ Business School, if you follow the link, has put on a couple of their online classes at a very reduced price. I think this is normally over $500 as a result of the current crisis. I believe you can register for these classes for around $8. I think there are 3 reduced offerings that they've put up there. So once again, a couple of people have mentioned about unemployment. It could be a good time to brush up on your skills if you've got some downtime. So that might be something you want to look at. But it's been a real pleasure talking to everyone. And I'm glad I had this opportunity. And I always learn something from Andrew and Effie as well. So thank you to my other panelists.
No, thank you very much, guys. It was a pleasure to talk to you guys and share thoughts. It's brilliant.
Thank you. Always. And I too learnt so much. Next time, I think we should do it over some cask wine.
Sounds good.
Wear polyester as well.
All right, let's wrap things up. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming, guys. We will see you in the next Young Alumni event. Thank you, Effie and Sean. Much appreciated.